Hey everybody, it's FrSky Steve, and we're talking about servos, we're talking about servo twitchiness, we're talking about filtering, we're talking about providing power to the servos, and we're talking about other things that can cause your servos to go haywire. So this is going to be a pretty interesting topic, and let's get right into it. I put out something about something called analog filtering and why you should turn it on. By default, it's usually on, and to check if it's on for you, all you have to do is go into SYS right there and go to hardware, and you'll see it's right here at the top. It'll say analog filtering, and what this does is if you find you have glitchiness with your servos, they, for whatever reason, a little bit of unsmooth movement or whatever, you can turn this on and it smooths it out. Now, it does smooth it out at the expense of latency. So, for most people who fly fixed wing, it's not going to make a difference. It will make a difference to you if you fly fixed wing and you're flying 3D quite a bit, especially competitive 3D. And then it will make a difference if you're flying helicopters and you are doing a lot of really extreme helicopter flying. Then you would probably want to turn it off. So let's say that you turn it off and you say across the board, I'm going to turn it off. But since this is in the hardware settings and this was under system, you've turned it off for every single model. Now let's say that you want to go back to your model and you want to see for yourself. I mean, trust but verify. And so what you can do is you can go into the model icon, and you go into edit model and you go down here and it will say global for analog filtering, which means that it's going to defer on this particular model to whatever you have set up. Now if you had turned it off and you wanted to, on this particular model, turn it on to see what it does, all you have to do is turn it on right there, and all of a sudden that glitchiness, you can see if it works for you, and if it does do something that's of value, hey, great, you got it fixed. Now, let's look at some other things that happen and when it comes to twitchiness and servos. This came up about 1.5 years ago. This was, what we're going to do is we're going to hit the airplane icon and go into the RF section right here. This was brought up to be by somebody who it was a Warbird guy, and he'd been buying the high-tech HS645MG servos for a number of years. It's a servo that High-Tech came out with in 1998. It was a workhorse. It's just a great servo. People loved it. The Warbird guys ate it up. They ate them like chiclets, man. They just one after another. Loved those. They buy them. I think they were about $35, $40. And even High-Tech, after a while, decided that they came out with a better servo. They came out with a digital version of the servo. But what this guy noticed was that the servos were moving. And they weren't moving randomly. Well, they were moving randomly, but they were all moving in by the same amounts. So he's like, something is causing this to move. And what we did was headquarters, we actually got some of these high-tech HS645MGs, and we had to figure out what the problem was. And what it turned out to be was that it was the telemetry from the 900 megahertz on the Tandem receivers that was causing the issue. So what you do to turn that on or off, to deal with this situation when you have these high-tech servos, you go into the options and you hope like hell that this doesn't, this is giving up. So what I'm going to do is go back out to here, and we'll try this one more time, go into the RF section, go back to here and try it again, hit options. Please work, please work, please work, please come up, please come up. There it is. Hey, it worked this time. Fantastic. All right. So these are two options here that do different things. And what we did with an update we had this latest firmware update, put this in, and unfortunately we didn't do a great job of explaining what that does. There's more than 25 milliwatts for telemetry on the 900 megahertz receivers. When you turn this on, what it does is it reduces the amount of telemetry to 25 milliwatts. I think people look at it and think like, I'm going to get more telemetry out of it. No, unfortunately, you're getting less telemetry. And what you run the risk of is that You might be flying far away and you'll hear a telemetry loss warning and you're thinking, oh my gosh, my plane's about to crash. No, actually your signal from your transmitter to your receiver goes much further than the signal from your receiver back to your transmitter. That signal back to your transmitter is called telemetry, and that's all the information as far as your link quality. It gives you information as far as anything else you have going on there, and the sensors or servos that use our F-bus protocols. All this information is no longer being shared because the plane flew out of range and the telemetry is lost. But your plane's not going to crash. It's just the telemetry will go away until you come back in range. So if you're not having a problem with jittering servos or servos that move by themselves, please just keep that off. The high PWM speed. Okay, so there are essentially two types of servos, and there's more to it, but you have analog servos and you have digital servos. Analog servos tend to be what you find in a lot of planes these days, especially the foamy planes. Even some of the higher end foamy planes are starting to get digital servos, and the quality of the servos they're hit or miss, to say the very least. Usually they're not very good when they come along with the plane. So what you could do is you can go in here and you can change out your, if you do have a servo that is a digital servo, it has, the way it works is much different from analog. Analog refreshes 60 times every second, whereas a digital servo refreshes 300 times a second. And so when this is off, it's refreshing at 60 times a second. But when you turn this on and you have a digital servo hooked up to it, it will refresh at 300 times a second. So what you might notice is that you get a little bit better performance out of it. So what I recommend is if you have a digital servo, and especially if it's acting crazy, I've heard that the MKS 777 is having issues. What I would do before turning down the telemetry is to actually turn this on, and I might even go in and turn off the analog filtering for this particular model and see if that works. And the last thing I would do is work with the telemetry at 25 milliwatts. Okay, the other thing I was going to show you is under device config, which is by hitting the system, you go into device config. There's something here called an SBEC, and it's battery elimination circuit. The idea behind this was a long time ago, you would have, with electric planes, you would have one battery for your motor and you have another one for your servos. So what they did is they used something called the voltage regulator to drop down the voltage that came from the main battery for your flight, for your motor, and you're able to use that battery to power both your motor and your servos. Okay, great stuff, right? The issue was that the original ones were using something called a linear BEC. So the way they worked is if you have a 3S battery, when it's fully charged, it's over 12 volts, and you had, let's say, a 6-volt servos, what you would do is you would have it regulate down to 6 volts, and then what it would do is take the extra 6 volts that it wasn't using, and it would turn it into heat. And then when you went to 3S to 4S, that was about 10 volts you would have to turn into heat. So as you put larger and larger batteries in, it's producing quite a bit more heat. And the better version of this now is a switching battery elimination circuit, something that actually regulates the voltage with a switching regulator, and that is what is called an SBEC. And when you have that, it's superior. What we have with FrSky is we have them where it actually ties in and gives you telemetry back, so it gives you pack voltage, and it also, what it will do is it'll put out the power. You can configure it. This doesn't work in the simulator, but it does work when you set it up correctly. And you can put out 7.4, 8.4 volts. Actually, you can dial it up or down by a tenth of a volt. It's really kind of cool how it works. And you can also get, it's really a nice little thing to have. The last thing, it's not on here, but there's something that is called, I don't know why it's not on here. It is, we have these ESCs that are called the Neuron. So we have the Neuron 60 and the Neuron 80. And these ESCs have that aspect like I was telling you about, plus the ability to read the pack voltage and also the power consumption coming from your flight pack and putting it into it will go from your receiver back to your transmitter via telemetry, and you can in real time see how much power you're consuming and how much time you have, what your battery voltage is, and it's really cool how that all works. Now, the last thing I will tell you is that when it comes to planes, the big thing now is jets. So there are essentially, the hierarchy of jets is the turbine jet community. There's about 2,000 guys around the United States who fly turbine jets, and they have to go to these far off fields in the middle of nowhere and fly these big turbine jets because they're really big, really expensive. And there's probably, I would say, 500 to 1,000 more people who have a turbine jet without the turbine waiver, and maybe have at least one. But when you look at the market, for every one of these guys that are out there, in whichever number you have, 2,000, let's say. So, okay, yeah, so if you had 2,000 pilots flying with the turbine jet, I'd say out of the 180,000 people that fly, have an AMA membership, I'd say somewhere in the United States that we have 80,000 people who fly, who have at least one EDF jet. So the EDF market is quite a bit larger than the turbine market, and a lot of these EDF turbine manufacturers have some nice small sports jets that are about 2 meters and they weigh about 20 pounds, and they're starting to figure out that they can put EDFs into these jets and sell them to the EDF pilots. Now, why are they doing that? And the reality is, what they're trying to do is they're trying to go after a much larger market, because the EDFs can be flown just about anywhere, and there's far fewer regulations on the EDF. Even though their flights are shorter, they're often 3 to 5 minutes, but the reality is you get the benefit of flying a really nice jet. And a lot of these jets are composite, or they're made out, or they have wood of some kind. So these things are getting upwards of 20 pounds. And these SBECs, because they are using, which essentially is a servo connector, the most they can put out is 8 amps. And when we start looking at these larger planes, heavier planes, and there's more than just EDF jets, but if you have something that has some weight to it, you probably need to start thinking about how much power you're delivering to it. So I'll give you an example. When you look at if we're going to create a new model, and right here I wanted to show you, if we create model and we go in and you can start to look at the stabilized receivers, there's this TD-SR18, and you can see right there and right there, those are X30 connectors. So on these models that are the 18, the TDR18, the TD-SR18, what they have is 30 amps. As opposed to 8 amps, they have a total of 30 amps of input for power, and that can distribute to all the different servos a lot more power than just 8 amps. And then the other thing it does is that it has redundancy as well. So, but the benefit of this is that in a pinch, they can go up to 60 amps. And for a few seconds, that might get you through a tough turn or something like that, especially if you happen to be jamming with all your control surfaces at the same time. So the other option is this one called the TD-SR12. And this one has output of 20 amps. And momentarily, it will go up to 30 amps. And still, that's quite a bit more power. It's more than twice the amount that you would get off of an S-Spec. Still, you know, it's up to you. If you're flying a plane that's 10 to 15 pounds, it's probably fine. But if you're starting to get 15 to 20 pounds and you're flying this thing aggressively, then yeah, I would go up the TD-SR18 or the TDR18. And with that, I think we've covered quite a bit when it comes to servos. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I do thank you for watching.